All right, you can click me forward. All right, so we're going to do very, very, very basic insurance. So this is me, Gisela. So I own an insurance brokerage. I've been working in healthcare for 20 years. And you guys are looking exceedingly young. Like, wow, they look like babies. I met a neurosurgeon that just came out of practice, and I'm like, you're kidding me. You're trained already? Like, they just look younger and younger. But all right, let's go ahead and click forward. So we're going to cover only very, very basic, these three. So if I'm out of video, tell me, Sammy. Medical professional liability, most important insurance product you'll have in your career. And then health and disability. These are the three that you're really going to see at least the first 5 years out into the real world. Okay, so, and I'm going to focus most of the attention on the first one, which is malpractice insurance. Technically.
Should I allow the website to access my microphone?
Don't do that.
No, do not.
Okay.
Actually do, it could get interesting. Okay, so first of all, what is it? Is everybody here even familiar with malpractice insurance? Have you guys already kind of heard talk about it a little bit? But no, wow, really? Okay.
About it, but I don't know the nuts and bolts.
Okay, but you know you need it in order to protect yourself. Okay.
The reason I've asked her to come is I graduated with nothing, so I'd like you guys to at least hear a little something about it, so that you're not at stage 0 when you have to take a look at it.
Yeah, so the most important one is going to be malpractice insurance. So every single one of you will have it. You'll either pay for it, or if you are in an employment setting, your employer will pay for it and basically take it out of your pay. So you will all be paying malpractice insurance in your careers. Will most of you think you'll stay in state, or is everybody thinking they have plans to go out of state, or no one knows yet? They're just trying to. So rates vary by state. California is actually pretty good in terms of what we pay for general surgery rates here. If you went to New York, your malpractice insurance would be 6 figures, about $100,000 a year. Yeah, so there's certain areas that are really tough. If
Boston?
you go to Kentucky,
Boston?
Boston's not as bad. New York has no protections for you, so it's whatever the jury wants to award, whether you did something wrong or not. So. So state does matter. So, and that's something that when you start really looking to see where you're going to set up shop, I would ask those questions up front because it makes a really big difference. In California, on average, you're going to be paying roughly between 20 and 30,000 compared to, like I said, New York, that's at 100,000. Florida's about 40. If you go to Cook County, Illinois, you're looking at about 80. So there's huge variances depending on the state, and that's because of the legal protections you get. We'll get into a little bit of that, but we don't have to cover a lot of ground, so I'm going to only touch on things the best I can. Go ahead. All right, so I'm going to cover the 3 main things in malpractice. Claims, when you get sued. Consent, and I'll explain what that means, because I can sue you and you have to agree that you want to pay something to me. So you can't just say, oh, the insurance company is going to go ahead and decide that, well, we know you really didn't do anything wrong, but it's a lot cheaper to just pay it than to go to court, so we're just going to pay it. But that goes against your license, which a lot of folks don't realize. So we're going to get into that a little bit. And then cost, which I started touching on, the big variances state to state, and what plays into the cost. And we'll get into this in a bit, but you'll get offers that say, don't worry, we'll take care of your malpractice. And you'll think, oh, hooray, it's free. It's not. And I'll explain why it's not, but we'll get into that. All right. First poll, while everybody's still eating lunch. What % of you will have faced a malpractice lawsuit by the end of your career? A, 99%, B, 76%, or C, 38%. And this data, I take it that you're going to work to age 65, which is such a foreign concept for you young folks here in the room. But if you work to age 65, and this was a study done by the AMA, what % of you will have faced a malpractice lawsuit?
A.
All right, let's see it. Let's see our results, Sammy. This is a smart group. You're correct. 99%. Yeah, 99%. I know. And you know, I'm not really sure that there's even a 1%, frankly, that I've never seen a general surgeon without ever having experienced the claim. But I guess they're out there somewhere. I'm thinking it's probably like within the Veterans Association.
Salesforce clean still.
Is he? Mike isn't. Is he?
Is he? I think that he had to do a deposition, but I think that's.
But that was as a resident.
Yeah, it was. I thought
Yeah.
it was even in residency that he might have had something. But
He had to give a deposition, but I don't know if he was actually named.
well, definition of a claim is named. So
Oh,
if you actually get
okay,
named,
there you go. You can't
Yeah.
even get out of
Yeah.
residency. Come on in. No, it's us.
okay. Let's go.
Who was that?
See the picture.
Okay, so the point of this is, it seems foreign to you now. You will get sued. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when it actually happens. And so I think part of what you're trying to do here is to sort of prep you a little bit for it, because right now it seems like, it's so far down the road, but sadly I've done a lot of hand holding. Actually, the general surgeon up in Oregon who just had her first suit, and she was like heartbroken. I mean, on the phone crying because she took such good care of this patient. It comes out of nowhere. It's very surprising.
The first is the worst. Now I don't care.
Yeah. For her, it was a very traumatic thing because she's really invested in her patients. It's a rural community. And so anyway, kind of an interesting thing, but let's go. All right. So let's talk about claims each year. And so what we're referencing here, I just wanted you to get an idea compared to other specialties of all of the practicing general surgeons in this study, 15% of them had a claim each year. Yeah, no, it's a lot, huh? If you're in pediatrics, it's only 3%, but if you're a neurosurgeon, it's 18%. So almost a fourth of every neurosurgeon gets a claim every year. So yeah, that's a lot. And then all specialties, it just encompasses everybody from derm to neuro to ortho to OB to whatever, and about 7% of all physicians across the country get a claim each year. So, yeah. I mean, well, let's compare it to car accident. How many have had a car accident this year? Last year? In the last 5 years? Yeah, kind of interesting. Kind of interesting, right? So when you compare it to claims in other areas of our lives, this is, your professional liability, but in your personal liability, your claim statistics are much better than in the professional. So, any questions on that, or did everybody understand that statistic pretty well? Okay, let's go. Okay, indemnity. So in the insurance world, there's two components to the insurance policy. Indemnity is what's going to be paid on your behalf to the patient that you have wronged, right? That they've said there's this negligence that occurred and we're going to make this indemnity payment. Then there's the expenses. So Randy Even was here last week. He gets paid out of expenses. Roughly on your average suit that's going to pay out $300,000 in indemnity to the patient, the defense costs are roughly $60,000 to $70,000 to give you some ideas. So, and we'll get into higher payments, but average just means of all the claims that were paid out in general surgery specifically, the average was $319,000 is what was indemnified to the patient, which basically indemnity within this insurance contract means getting them back to the position they were in before you had this negligent act, is what the legal definition is. So again, let's compare to other specialties, because I think this gives you a framework for comparing. Plastic surgery average indemnity, this is kind of a surprising one, is only $186,000, which you think would be higher. And then oral surgery is very low at $92,000. What goes into this number, a lot of in all specialties is much higher at $328,000, but there you've got neurosurgery, OB, which is traditionally extremely high indemnity payments. And a lot of the times that's because if you've got a baby with catastrophic injury, you have a lifetime of paying for care. And so you get into the 20, 30, $40 million, which is what drives that average up, because if you're an allergy specialist, then your indemnity is probably $5,000. So that's what goes into these numbers. Let's go on to highest indemnity, I think. Oh, paid to close. So this is another ratio to give you. So there will be, over the course of your career, let's say you have 10 claims. Of those 10 claims, in theory, if we're looking at the ratios anyway, I think your bottom one is you, 3 of those will actually pay something to the patient, right? So Randy talked to you about, you get the lawsuit, you get the paper, you go do your depositions, you go through discovery, all this. You could go through all of that, but it doesn't mean that there's actually going to get anything paid to the patient. Maybe they defend you and say, no, everything you did was perfect. So it still costs money to defend you out of the suit. But when there's an actual amount paid to the patient, then it goes into these ratios. And so again, just to compare to everybody, if we have, in general surgery is the bottom line here, so about 30% of the time, there's an actual payment made on your behalf to the patients. So is that surprising you, by the way, the 30%? I thought that was high for general surgery, but.
No, it doesn't surprise me. I'm just thinking I'm looking pretty good there so
Yeah.
far with 0.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But that means 70% of the time, either you're
It's frivolous.
exonerated or or it's frivolous.
Yeah.
Some things don't hopefully
Or you
through.
dragged into it because maybe you were on trauma call that weekend, and so everybody kind of gets named into
You
those.
get named and
so-
dropped. That happens a lot.
Yeah, so, and we get a lot of that, so, and then again, let's compare it, so psychiatry, 15% of the time, and a lot of those psychiatry claims actually end up being, they've been given a prescription and somebody's jumping out a window, or they go and drive after they're taking, or there's the sexual abuse during therapy, so that's a lot of what goes into psychiatry. Oral surgery, 42%, and all specialties combined, you're pretty close to what you are, which is 26%, so, all right, let's go. Largest payments. So again, this is in the study that took about 3,000 claims across all specialties. And so for you, your highest payment was $2.7 million. The highest was all specialties, 13 million. Remember we talked about that? Who remembers why that's high? Where's the highest number going to come from? OB, yeah, the babies.
New York babies.
New York.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, that is true. It is New York babies. Internal medicine, though, 12 million. That's a pretty high number if you think about how much more it is from you. Part of that takes into account that it accounts for much more care, right? You're specialists, and they're going to see more patient volume, and they're going to have the missed hearts. They're going to have the missed cancer. So that's usually what's in that number, missed cardiac and missed cancer. And then oral surgery, again, 3 million, namely because if someone can't eat for the rest of their life, then they're going to get a pretty good award there. So that's what's going into these numbers. This is an interesting thing, and I brought it because I thought it was worth mentioning. So this is one of the insurance. So I'm a broker. I'm an insurance broker. I work with a ton of different insurance companies. One of the ones I work with is NorCal. One that just sent you some umbrellas, by the way, is medical protective, and everybody feel free to take one. But anyway, so this company, NorCal, which is one of the ones that I represent, they did a study about this high payment of 2.7 million. And it's an interesting thing. This number in almost all of the specialties, with the exception of OB, reflects a problem we're having in treating obese patients. Obesity is probably the biggest malpractice driver everybody's talking about these days. I brought these for you to scan in all your spare free time because I'm an insurance nerd and think it's interesting. But what it talks about is some of the challenges in dealing with that patient population. One of the cases in there is the patient didn't fit in the MRI. So you're trying to diagnose, you're trying to figure out what's going on. They couldn't fit him in. It was a weekend, had to wait for another center to open offsite, couldn't get him in the ambulance. So there's all these issues, and you're going to pay out a malpractice claim because of those issues. And they also tend to have other issues, blood pressure and diabetics, and so they tend to have these other issues. And so our country is getting fatter and fatter. And so you're going to see more of this really than you ever had to see, really, because that's just the direction that the country's heading in. So if you get the opportunity to do any focusing in on anything with patient safety, it would be in the obesity track. That's what everybody's, asking for more information on. So, and of course, a lot of my clients are like, well, I have to see them. You can't go, oh, well, this person's obese, I'm not going to treat them. And so learning how to manage that care. And one of the things they talk about is obesity discrimination. That healthcare providers tend to not give as good of care to patients that present that are obese, and that apparently this is a documented thing. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But it's in that article. If you want to give it a view, it's kind of an interesting article. It talks about the radiology perspective of it. And I don't remember what the other case is in there, but it kind of focuses on obesity. So it's something worth looking at. Go ahead. Thanks. So I talk so much about you getting sued, and I'm telling you all, you're going to get sued, and I feel like, it's like doomsday predictions for me because I don't have anything good to tell you. There's two things that I can tell you I've done this for 20 years, worked with docs for 20 years. There's only really two things that I've ever seen impact claims. Providing good care, of which I can't help you because I'm not a clinician, and that's where you come in. But I have seen good relationships. And this is a kind of an interesting thing. I've spoken about this for years and years and years. If you can relate to a patient, even if something goes poorly, if there's a bad outcome, they tend to not want to sue you. Relationships matter in life and in your careers. You'll find this. I have some clients that are absolutely phenomenal clinically, but they're really just jerks. They're just not likable people, and they have claims, and it's difficult to defend them. Remember, you'll be before a jury, and if you're not real likable, I want to award something against you because you're just not that likable. And if you are very likable, the opposite happens. People tend to want to protect physicians. You know, that's kind of a society value that we have. And so I'm going to do a quick little exercise on this. Go ahead and click for me, Sammy. My paper and pens. You get free pens today too, by the way. You can just pass a sheet of paper and a pen. It's a real easy one, by the way. And this comes from an exercise, actually, interestingly enough. I did a training on negotiation skills. And so I interviewed a hostage negotiator, figuring they've got to have the best negotiation skills of anybody I know.
Probably.
I vote. And so when I interviewed her, this is some of the things that I took from that presentation. So tell me when you're ready. One thing about insurance, you get a lot of free stuff in insurance. Although they're not great pens, by the way. All right, what I want you to do is just draw one horizontal line across the page. Here, let me do one too, so you guys can see what you're doing. So just one horizontal line. All right, so you guys are looking like this, right?
Well, yeah.
Got it? Okay. So on the left-hand side is cool, and on the right-hand side is warm. Your pen already doesn't work. I told you they weren't great pens. I did a disclaimer on that. Okay, everybody there? I want you to plot yourself somewhere between cool and warm. You're gonna decide for yourself if you are on the cooler side or on the warmer side. I am.
Definitely spicy.
I'm about there.
Like cool.
Yeah. You know, you're kind of, people will refer, you know, so a good example. Sammy is far warmer than I am. When he sees you, he'll like hug you, and I will not. I will say, hi, how you doing? You know, kind of keep a distance. So
I'm habanero warm.
habanero, oh, and you could be, yes, if you're all the way on the warm side, you'd be able to be. So you guys are plotting? Okay. Now, draw another line for me, like this, perpendicular. Go ahead and click for me, Sammy. At the top, you're going to be fast. At the bottom, you're going to be slow. Fast and slow. Fast and slow. Not surgically, just in general. You know, like when you're walking, do you walk really fast, or are you more like, you know, like when you sit down, you go like this, or you like, you know, really quickly in motion? You speak quickly, you move quickly. Fast or slow? Everybody done?
He's off the chart.
He's off the chart. Okay. So everybody should have a page that looks like this, right? Okay. Where your quadrants intersect then, I intersect right here. I'm cold and fast. Let's see what you are.
Fast and warm.
Fast and warm. Most of you are going to be cold and fast, is my guess.
Oh, I'm fast and warm.
Another fast and warm. But who's anything besides cold and fast?
I'm only on the y-axis.
I'm in the middle.
Me too.
You're right in the middle? Oh, that's a good thing. Being in the middle is a very good thing. It means you relate to more people. It's pretty much everybody cold and fast, is my guess, right? Cold and fast.
I would say cold as well. Yeah. You are right. Yeah. Like a turtle.
I mean, slow doesn't mean sloth. It just means, you know, you're more methodical, right? You can be very methodical. It's a style. Go ahead. Okay, so here's why you care about this. Most of you will feel more comfortable relating to people that are the same speed and temperature as you are. So, anybody here who's slow? Who is slow in here? Did anybody do slow?
Oh, yeah, you
Slow.
are.
Okay.
Sure.
When I speak with you, I have to make a very concerted effort to slow down my speech pattern, because you will be naturally uncomfortable with me speaking at my normal speech, right? You'll do this with your patients. You'll find that with all of your patients. Start paying attention now. You can do this in your personal life, by the way, as well. With friends, with boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, whatever. But it's particularly with patients, you'll find your comfort and their comfort, which is what's most important, match their speed and match their temperature. If a patient is incredibly cool, they really don't want a lot of the, you know, warm and fuzzies with you. They'll feel more comfortable if you remain very clinical. If the patient is very warm, though, they need the warm touch. What are the rules now on physical touch?
So don't ask me, I break them.
Okay,
Depends
Everybody
if you're
breaks
a
them.
psychiatrist or not.
fair enough. He was listening, see? I will tell you that one of the things that most of the training programs used to do, and I don't know that they still do, but it's very effective, is he's a hot one, right? So he wants
yeah.
physical touch, right? He wants me to go, how you doing? He likes this, you know. Well, not that physical, but
In
yeah.
our profession, we do have to touch people, right?
Okay,
So
good.
you can either use that, or you can be very clinical when you examine somebody, or you can use that as an opportunity to connect with them sometimes.
That is correct. And so it's the connection piece. What I'm trying to drive here, guys, is it makes a difference. It doesn't just make a difference because you won't get sued, but you won't get sued. If you can relate to your patients a bit, you will be shocked how far it takes you. You can be the most phenomenal surgeon the planet has ever seen, and if you can't relate to patients, it's just one of those things that's going to end up in lawsuits. So you almost want to start practicing this in your personal life as well. And if you start to look in your friend groups, you'll see you're naturally attracted to people that match your speed and match your temperature. Although, interestingly enough, we choose mates that tend to be at the opposite quadrants. For whatever reason, I guess we like challenges, but you will find your mates tend to be the exact opposite quadrant of what you are, which is probably why our divorce rates are so high, but.
Just thinking.
All right, let's go ahead and go. Oh, and I should go back to that one real quick. One of the things I wanted to point out on this slide is that these 4 words are kind of what I try and use for people to remember. If you have somebody who, nobody here was slow and warm is my guess, right? Slow and warm. You weren't slow and warm, right? I didn't think so. No offense. I got slow and cold.
Dr. Wozniak could probably be slow and warm.
Yeah, you know what? Patients don't think he talks enough to them. He's too short with them in the office. That's the most frequent feedback I get. Either they measure them completely or they have that complaint.
Oh, wow.
So you
Yeah.
can see this in a patient. If a patient comes to you and they immediately start talking about all the volunteer work they do, and they love to garden on the weekends, and they're wearing very neutral clothing that's like soft and comfortable, you already know you've got somebody slow and warm. It's real easy to identify these kind of things. If the accurate people are going to be very similar to you, that's why you're in this profession, you're drawn to this a lot. So the slow and cools you're going to see them dressed that way. They're going to have haircuts that are not fashion forward. They're going to be sort of simple, efficient people. They're going to wear tucked in shirts with, you'll see a lot of 90-degree angles in their clothing. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing if you start to pay attention. You'll start to see these characteristics with people. The fun ones, who was the hot and warm? He was the hot and warm, right?
Yes.
Tend to be more fashion forward haircuts. He cares what he looks like. You know, he'll wear clothes that's a little more stylish. So you will definitely see a difference on the fast and warms. The women will come in wearing name brands. They'll have colorful clothing. They're not going to be muted clothes like I wear. It's going to be pinks and reds and yellows, and you know you'll be able to pick them out pretty quick. They're the easiest to pick out of everybody. The fast and cools are going to pretty much look same as I do. You'll see them move they're easy to pick out as well. Our speech patterns are very fast. So anybody talking very fast, you already know they're a fast person and you want to deliver information quickly to them. They're not looking for you to, you know, slow down and this sort of thing. So I wanted to give you those things, the things that they kind of appeal to those sort of people, like the fast and warms. They like fun. You know, you're going to appeal to them in a fun way. They're going to appeal to the slow and warms through causes and volunteer actions, and the slow and cools, they want accurate information. You know, you're going to give them very specific, accurate information. The fast and cools are looking for challenge. Like, oh, you should be recovering in 2 weeks. They'll go, means I'm going to be recovering in a week, right? That's what the kind of speech you're going to get from them. All right, any questions on this? You guys kind of get this? I'm trying to cover, this is an hour presentation on itself that I'm giving you guys in like 5 minutes. So, all right, let's go. Back to the boring stuff, claim terms. I'm only going to go over 2 terms. There's hundreds. But these are, I think, the ones that are most important when you get, since my talk is what you need to know after residency. The first one's notice of intent. Randy probably talked about it. In California, it's different in every state. The state rule here, the Code of Civil Procedure in California, 364, says, in order to sue you, I first have to send you notification that I'm going to sue you. So you'll get a notice, and you'll often hear them referred to as 90-day notices. You'll get the 90-day notice that says, I'm going to sue you. This is the patient's name. and I'm going to sue you because of X. They have to describe what the injury is. It is in the Code of Civil Procedure in this state. Not every state mandates it. I'm not even sure why it's mandated because nobody ever settles these cases within 90 days, but for whatever reason, this is what starts a claim in this state. That's the first thing you'll get is you'll have it delivered and they'll serve you with a 90-day notice of intent.
Which they don't always follow.
They don't, and you don't actually get a leave out of them not following civil procedure, but interestingly enough, they're
So
supposed
I've
to.
had two that never follow
Somebody
it.
can just send one to you, get you all worked up, and then
Well,
not follow them.
They might change their mind. Yeah, so it's
Or they
not the
couldn't get an
actual
attorney
suit.
to actually, take the case or what have you, so.
Mm.
And, the other thing with the notice of intent is it starts the clock ticking. So if you do have a bad outcome in a surgery, then they have to file suit within a given period of time. Roughly, it's 18 months. It depends what state, depends if it's a PED and all this other stuff, but just say roughly 12 to 18 months,
I have a
depending.
question.
Yes.
The notice of intent, does that mean they got an attorney? They can do that themselves.
No, you can do it yourself. You
So
can
I
be
think
in
that's
broker.
what happens sometimes because
Yeah.
I think what happens because the last notice of intent I threw it in the trash.
Not supposed to throw it in the trash. I'm your broker, by the way.
Because I read it and I was not the only person sued. I was the assistant. I wasn't the primary surgeon. And I threw it in the trash because I read it and I went, yeah, no way. So, and then nothing happened. I think she probably went to a lawyer and then discovered she didn't have much of a case. So.
Yeah, and it does stop the clock ticking. So a lot of the times when they send out these notices, it's because they have to get in under the statutory timeline to sue you. And so they'll send these to make sure that they've met that statutory requirement, that they've got to get it on record. The other one's MICRA. This is, again, state specific for California. Is anybody familiar with this at all? Had heard anybody talk about it? No. So in the 70s here in this state, we enacted MICRA provisions. And what it does is it's very protective for you guys. So if you were to get that $2 million catastrophic case, only $250,000 of that will go to tort damages. The rest of it has to be to lost wages, medical care, that sort of thing. So the tort damages are your pain and suffering. Like, oh my gosh, I've suffered so much because you did this terrible surgery. I want $5 million. In this state, you can't get away with it. You'll get $250,000 max for tort damages. So we call them the pain and suffering damages. And that's what MICRA does for us here. It's constantly trying to be overturned. Plaintiffs' attorneys are always saying it's not enough. We need to increase the limit. I think 2 years ago they tried to bump it up to $750, but voters said no. And you'll hear about
you may
this.
be voting on it.
I remember that.
Yeah,
Keep
you
your
remember
eye on
that?
it.
Yeah, you'll hear about it. They're
Make
always
sure
trying to
you
get
keep
it on
it.
the ballot to overturn it. So make sure you don't want to
It was on the
overturn
ballot.
MICRA. We want MICRA to stay at $250,000. Where people often ask me, my docs are like, well, if we can only get $250,000, how come I got $1 million suit? It's because the other $750,000 are medical care. So remember the bad babies we talked about that are the 30 million? It's lifetime care, right? They're going to need full lifetime care. That's all medical damages. And you can assume that those babies would have eventually had a salary. And so you can then extrapolate out what the salary damages would be. So if any of you decide to start doing surgery on professional athletes, it's a problem because their salaries are so high that if you keep them from performing their jobs and they're getting $18 million a year, their loss of wages is astronomical. And so we actually have special underwriting for certain people. If you want to do, so for example, I have clients that do high school and college. We have sports physicians that travel all over the country. We have special provisions in their contracts because of that very reason. If you're doing, actually we had a med spa that did laser hair removal on a supermodel in her downstairs area and screwed up. And she was a supermodel that did lingerie work. So that was a $12 million claim. Yeah, because loss of wages, nobody wants to see scarred bikini models. I mean, they just don't. So yeah, so what the patient does play into things when it comes to claims. So interestingly enough, go ahead. So that's MICRA for you. This is the latest and greatest, particularly in your generation. Did you guys see the video with the doctor who was attacking the Uber driver? Did you guys see that on YouTube? It was like all over social
From
media.
Miami.
Did you guys see that one?
She was a resident.
No, I don't think she was a resident. She'd already graduated. She was already practicing. She was at the hospital already, I think. Maybe she was a resident. I can't remember.
I think she was
But
a
you saw the YouTube, she's like, flailing at him and like kicking and screaming. And it was, she's still suspended. Her privileges actually remain suspended today. This was like 2 years ago. That's what falls into employment practices. So this is something really important for you guys to understand. If you are an employee somewhere, as you are now, and a nurse says you were being frisky, You were saying inappropriate things. You were sharing a joke that you read that somebody texted you that you thought was hilarious but was inappropriate and made somebody uncomfortable. The PC world that we live in today, all of that is a problem. And that's what falls into employment practices indemnification. What you're going to find is some of your employers will pay for an attorney for you if you get a lawsuit in that area. Some will not. Some will say, you're such an idiot, pay for it yourself. You're the one that got yourself into this mess. And women are not excluded from this. I see lots of female cases now. It used to be always the boys that we were picking on. The girls now too. We do start to see everything in the employment practices related arena. The reason I brought up the doctor with the YouTube attack is because that starts to get into employment practices. The other two big areas are HIPAA and cyber. Everybody's got to know HIPAA now, right? You probably are hammered on HIPAA here all the time. Yes, I'm hoping. It's the other big area. Do not post patient names. I'm sure you guys have gotten all of this already. I can't tell you how many claims we see of jokes that somebody posts on their Facebook page about a patient they saw, names the patient, or just uses a first name, but it's a small community and it's pretty easy to figure out who it was. You have to be incredibly careful with social media. Everybody, I'm sure there's a policy here. Is there a social media policy here? Got to be. It's
There
image.
is.
There is. Do you know what it is?
No.
Okay. Do you guys know what the policy is if a patient says they want to videotape while you're giving instruction on something? Anybody know what that policy is?
Aren't they allowed to do it?
Depends. The facility can say no. So in
I'll
OB,
find out.
you get that a lot. In OB, all the time, people want to, pull out their phones and videotape now. So, so the facility will decide whether or not that's something you need to allow. If the facility says no, there's no videotaping allowed, then you guys can say, I'm sorry, put your phone away. I'm busy treating a patient. I don't want you videotaping what we're saying. So that's where we start to get into HIPAA and cyber. And then the other piece of this is HIPAA. Everybody's familiar with HIPAA protections. It's just any personal information, basically, is what you're in charge of. The cyber starts to get to EMR. What's the EMR system here?
Patient keeper.
Patient keeper. Okay. When you get into cyber, and I call it cyber, but it's actually information protection. If you print anything, take it home, stick it in your car, put it in your briefcase. If you have access on your phones, the number one cyber claim is not the, third world country people hacking into the target system. It's actually not. It's rogue employees and losing your laptop or your phone. That's where all of them are coming from. Losing laptops and phones. So a lot of the times you're dictating, downloading charts, downloading billing information, anything that's identifiable. If it's on your phone and you lose your phone, it's a HIPAA violation and a cyber violation. So be careful with the phones. Yeah, a lot of the employers we're seeing now, they're requiring a, Sammy, what's it called? The program that you can load onto the laptop so that no matter where you are, you can locate it. Find whatever it is. So it's required now by a lot of employers because if you lose it and you have all the sensitive data, they have to be able to capture it. So these are sort of up and coming claims that we've seen a lot, which will affect you much more than it affected, sort of the years before where we didn't have to worry so much about social media and what you post and what you're in charge of. Something that I try and say is a number one rule when it comes to HIPAA cyber stuff. If you don't have to have the information, don't. I mean, anything you have to protect, right? So for example, if you come to me for insurance and there's a box that asks for your social security number, I'm going to tell you, I don't even want it. I don't really need it. Don't fill it out because once you give it to me, I have to protect it. So I try and take as little of your information as possible because the less I have, the less I have to protect. And so you want you guys to have that same mindset. Any information you have, you're in charge of it. So you want to get as little as possible with obviously being able to do your job and what have you. EMR is a big thing. We've done a lot of information on EMR lately. We had a huge claim. We paid out $4 million because the radiologist didn't scroll down the 17,000 pages in an EMR system. And so they missed that there was some paralysis and instead just did a CT of the neck for neck pain. And anyway, long story short is that this 24-year-old guy is a quad and so paid out $4 million because he didn't scroll through the thousands and thousands of pages in this EMR system. So EMR is going to be an interesting thing. It's new, not for you guys, but new in our world. And we're starting to see the downside of EMR, and that's not as much personal writing. There's a lot of templates, a lot of cut and pasting, and too much information. And so by the time you actually get to the information you actually need to treat a patient, You've got to scroll 14 pages and most people don't. You're busy, you're rushed, you're in a hurry. Who wants to go scroll down and to get, the one little consult note? So it'll be interesting what happens because it's supposed to help, medicine. It's helped billing. It has not helped medicine. We actually have more claims based out of EMR than we do less. So coordinated care is not as coordinated as we thought it might be. So we will see what happens on that next. Go ahead. How am I looking on time, Sammy?
25.
Oh, okay, I'm doing okay. Lawyers do matter. So when you get into the real world, you'll get an insurance policy either provided by an employer, say it's a hospital or it's a Kaiser, or you'll hang a shingle, open your own practice, join a group, for example, and you'll have a choice of insurance companies. What you won't realize is the good attorneys work with the good insurance companies. The crap attorneys work with the crap insurance companies, and it matters. It makes a huge difference.
Also, some malpractice companies go out of business.
Now, failure rate for malpractice insurance companies is 76%.
So you want to get your malpractice, somebody's going to stay around. That happened to an anesthesiologist friend of mine in residency. He got sued, and shortly thereafter, his malpractice company went out of business. So,
We have two that just went under local, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I have a ton of problems at the moment with two insurance companies that went under. And you have, so let's just say, who wants to be my victim that got sued? Raise your hand. Who's getting sued today? You're getting sued. No, you've already been sued. Okay, so you're getting sued. You get sued. You call me up and say, Giselle, I've got a lawsuit. No problem. We've got the insurance. We're going to file it. Now, I wouldn't put you with a crappy carrier, but let's just say your carrier broker did. And things start cooking. You give your deposition. Things are going along. We go, this is a bad one. This is going to be one of those big cases. It's going to be a $2 million, right?
It's off-color joke.
You wanted to be employment practices.
that's different than malpractice.
Yeah,
And
well,
HIPAA
actually, there's a component of it in most malpractice policies.
Well, I had at least one case I was involved with, and
Yeah.
malpractice didn't cover that either.
Oh, it does now. Yours has it, by the way.
But it was somebody else's.
Oh,
It was
okay.
my
Yeah,
case,
yours
somebody
yours
else
has coverage on it
was
now. but-
fair. in
But
court, so.
Anyway, so now it's cooking, and you know this thing is coming, and your insurance company goes under. What do you do?
So I lose the case? I mean, I have to pay out
Yeah.
of pocket or what?
What can you do?
Find somebody else?
No, who's gonna take you? Now you're gonna, Giselle, I need other insurance. Oh yeah, sure. Another insurance company is really gonna come in and offer to cover that $1 million. Who's gonna take it? Think about the real world. You get into a really bad car accident, you total your car. What car insurance company is gonna walk in and say, oh, they went under, sorry, we'll cover it? Nobody. It's not gonna happen. So who you're insured with makes a big difference. Here's the other really interesting thing. Defense experts make a difference. You have a tough case, you want the best defense expert in the country. You want an insurance company that will pay to fly whoever that top person is to come in and support your position in the case. That's expensive. And so the only ones that do it are the top insurance companies, the good ones. Here's where it gets a little strange. We're going to get into consent provisions. More and more, you guys have heard this, more and more physicians are going into an employment model. Nobody wants to really hang a shingle anymore because it's hard. It's hard work. We just talked about this. We're both owners. We know how unglamorous it is to be a business owner. But here's the downside of going into these employment models. So give me your name. Garrett. So Garrett, you're working for ABC Medical Group, okay? And ABC Medical Group says, don't worry, we've got your insurance all covered for you. Malpractice is all taken care of. We think you're a great guy. We're going to take care of it. Awesome. Garrett gets sued. And Garrett goes, I did such a good job on this patient. Absolutely did nothing wrong. My care was perfect. I've looked at my records. Everything's awesome. And ABC Medical Group says, that's great. You don't have to consent. We don't need your permission. It's cheaper to pay this thing to go away than it is to defend you. And by the way, we're going to pay it out on your behalf, and then we're going to report it to the medical board under your medical license for the rest of your career. You want to have control of consent. You want to be able to say, absolutely not. I did nothing wrong. I want you to get me an attorney, and I want to fight it. Right? So consent matters. It's a really big deal. So when you get into these relationships and they offer you these contracts, have an attorney look it over. Don't just sign it thinking, God, I just got to pay all this I got to pay law school, all the medical school debt. I got to pay all, I'm in so far in debt. It's a good salary. It's a good place and I like it and I can go surfing nearby. Have an attorney look it over. It costs you $300 to have your contracts looked over. I probably get more calls from new folks in the real world that call me and say, I joined this group and now I want to leave and I have to buy out this tail. What the hell is tail? And then when I tell them, oh, I'm sorry, it's $60,000, they're like, if only I had looked at the contract. So I'm trying to give you things that I know you're going to make the mistakes before you make them, and I'll save you a couple of bucks doing it. So defense experts, consent provisions. You want to ask the question, if I get sued, do you need my consent to settle the lawsuit? It's a real simple question. Mr. Employer, if I get sued, do you need my consent to settle the lawsuit? That's all you got to know. Simple enough. Everybody got that? If you remember nothing from this talk, remember that one thing to ask. All right? Do I keep consent? Do you need my permission? All right, let's go. We talked about this, why it can hurt you. Are you guys understanding within the provisions of a lawsuit when you settle a claim? Did Randy get into that at all?
Not really.
No? Okay. So there are times where you're like, I'm busy. I've got a full week of surgery scheduled. If I have to go do depositions and all this, you're losing money, right? Because you've got to be away from work. But if you do decide, and let's pretend that you had the permission and you've given permission to settle the case, the ramifications of settling a case, where does that information go? Online? Medical board? Has anybody done a medical board search on themselves? Have you done one? Did you see? Okay.
For a while, my lawsuit popped up first.
It does. Okay.
Fortunately,
So
buried
it's
now.
online. And what do patients do right now if they're going to be searching? Everybody goes online first, right? So it does hurt you because it's there forever. It goes in these records. The other piece of it is medical staff offices, they can access a database called the National Practitioner Database, and anything that you settle is in that database, okay? So the information will always be there. And I just want you guys to be aware of it. You're going to have it, you might settle, and that's okay. Just be aware that it's not so simple as, oh, I settle it, I want to get back to work. The information will be there. Every time you go to recredential at a hospital or with the payer network, or you do your CAQH application, you have to report that there was a settlement and that it's on your license and in the database. All right? Okay, let's go. Contract provisions. We talked about this a little bit, so I'm going to gloss over it because I'm getting close on time. But employment contracts, also contracts with payer contracts. So you're going to start, at some point, you'll do Medicare contracting and Blue Shield and Blue Cross and IPAs and this and the other. Those contracts are going to require certain things. They're going to require malpractice insurance at certain limits. And again, they're going to have provisions in that contract that talk about indemnification. And what they're going to basically try and include in the contracts is anything you do wrong, you deal with it. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And they're called indemnification provisions, and you'll see them in the contracts, which is why you're going to spend the $300 to have an attorney look at it, because it's well worth it. Okay? Go ahead. Yep. Okay, mandated arbitration. Does anybody know what arbitration is before I get too in depth on this one? No, you've heard of it, I bet. No? Okay. In the normal legal system, you get an attorney, the other side gets an attorney. Has anybody been involved in any kind of litigation, lawsuit, any legal disputes whatsoever, even personal? Garrett has?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, personal or professional?
Personal.
Personal. Do you mind sharing it?
Well, it was a custodial thing, so I don't know if it was like.
Oh, okay. So that's going to be a little bit different when you go into civil. So in mandated arbitration, what they're saying is if you join an employer group that says you have to have your patient sign the arbitration. So, if you go, and I think CMH might even have mandated arbitration here, but when the patient has to sign in the intake that we agree to arbitrate any lawsuits. You guys seen that? No, you haven't seen it when you go to your own? None of you probably go to your own physicians, huh? So there's a form that says, and the patients sign it when they check in, and it says, if I'm going to sue you, I have to arbitrate. I know, which I always think is an odd way to begin a relationship with any clinician. That, oh yeah, by the way, if I sue you, it's going to have to be arbitrated. What the arbitration says is that you don't get your time in court. You agree to have what basically is a retired judge come in, they hear both sides. And it's a good thing because it makes the process less stressful. It's a bad thing because they tend to pay out more often. So you won't give these huge $2 million ones, but the term is to split the baby, the old adage of split the baby. That's kind of what arbitration ends up being. And so I want you guys to be familiar. If you see arbitration in your contracts, if your employer says you're going to be under an arbitration contract, it means you're never going to be able to say, no, I want to go to trial, defend me. They're going to say, no, we're going to arbitrate this thing, and you're going to go before an arbitrator instead of before a judge. Okay? All right, let's go. Oh, another poll. I'll wake everybody up too. I hear you're all sleep deprived. So, all right. What is a hammer clause in an insurance contract? Here's your 3 options for voting. An automatic policy cancellation after a claim, an exclusion in the policy for performing surgery while intoxicated, a policy provision which reduces limits of liability upon receipt of a settlement offer. A, B, or C?
Obviously.
Probably.
A, B, or C?
I don't think they're recording the answers. Oh, no, it is. Okay.
Oh, now it's coming in? Yeah, it takes a second. What did you guess, Connie?
Hey? I have no idea.
You're so funny.
Yes.
All right, can you scroll back down for me, Sammy? So a hammer clause. This is another one I want to make sure you understand because you'll see them. By the way, it's not B, but you know, there is an exclusion in most policies that if you have a claim and it is proven that you were intoxicated, they will not cover you.
Makes sense.
So FYI, I hate to tell you, we see it a lot, the drug and alcohol in the healthcare world. We do see it a lot.
What is intoxicated? Does it mean if you have any alcohol on board?
No.
Or do you have to meet
DUI levels.
the DUI level?
DUI levels. Yeah.
Insurance.
What's DUI level? Point.
0.08.
Oh, wait,
No,
is
because
that
I've
what it
seen
is?
people get reprimanded for coming into the ER having had alcohol on their breath.
Well, so now technically, and I've seen facilities that say 0 alcohol.
Yeah,
That doesn't even have to be DUI level. The facility can
it's
say
sort of like
mandated.
aviation criteria.
Yeah, I
You
have
cannot
seen
have
that.
any-
And sometimes it's in the call contract. You know, your call contract could say,
When you're on call, no alcohol.
correct. I have seen call contracts that say 0 alcohol while you are on call. It doesn't even have to be at the facility, it's just in your contracts. So, but no, it's not B. There's not, technically, that's not what a hammer clause is, but there is an exclusion for that kind of behavior. Anything.
I would answer, you know, about
Yeah.
alcohol. So I used to, you one glass. The
Excellent.
the problem of having to deal with an accusation, it might be a bigger deal than anything else. You weren't intoxicated, but somebody could tell there was wine on your breath or whatever it is. So
It's not
you
worth
just
the
need to be-
hassle.
It's not worth the hassle. So you just really have to consider that.
Yeah, and most peer review situations have to do with drugs and alcohol. So in most malpractice insurance policies, you'll have coverage for an attorney to defend you if you get into a peer review situation, which basically means usually it's medical staff office saying there's some issue with getting you re-credentialed. Pretty common nowadays, medical board as well, and a lot of that is usually DUI stuff. And you guys are all familiar with, if you get a DUI in your personal life, it still impacts your license, right? Just because it doesn't involve patient care. Everybody knows that? Okay. And that's any acts. I have a client that's been 12 years, we've been trying to work our way through it. And he, you know that show where they catch the predator? You know those catch the predator shows? Well, I had one of my clients was a catch the predator, and
He was on the show.
yeah. And you know what? His license got put on probation, and I'm like, but it didn't. He's an excellent. I hate to tell you, he's a phenomenal guy, an excellent physician, but he's got
Is he a pediatrician?
no internal medicine.
Oh.
No internal medicine.
Med
But I had
peds.
two.
Med
actually.
peds.
Yeah, and I've had 2 of them. I had an OB as well with an underage minor. And that stuff, even though now his was a patient, but the other one, the predator guy wasn't even, it wasn't a patient. It was just, he's married too, by the way, and it was, but he has these homosexual tendencies or what have you. And yeah, it was a 3-year probation. He had to go through psych testing down at UC San Diego. I mean, it was like this very expensive ordeal for the guy over what I think shouldn't impact care, but it's part of licensing. So you'd be shocked how much goes into peer review. But anyway, so back to our poll. How many did we guess answer C? Who answered C? C is the right answer. You guys answer C. What this means is we're back to, you've got the claim and you don't want to settle, and you're with an insurance company or an employer that says, we got an offer to settle this thing for $100,000, and you're like, but I didn't do anything wrong. I'm like, yeah, but I can get out of it for $100,000. Your policy goes from having $1 million in it to $100,000. That's called a hammer clause. They can hammer your limit down to whatever the settlement offer is. So when you buy $1 million policy with a hammer clause, you're not actually buying $1 million policy. You're buying $1 million policy unless there's a settlement that reduces it down. Yours doesn't have a hammer because you're with one of the good carriers. Yes. The top carriers, the really good insurance carriers, they don't have this. But others will, and sometimes in employer situations, you know, the hospital wants to have control of this. And so you'll see this in a lot of situations. Hammer clause. Go ahead. We can go past this one. I'm trying to cut some time here. I'm already at 50 minutes. Okay, cost.
You're fine, we're flexible.
Yeah, okay.
It's valuable.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about how different the costs are. I'm gonna give you a little bit of information that's kind of interesting. When you first come out of school, your insurance is cheap, cheap, cheap. All my clients love hiring you guys straight out of training because it's cheap. You get a 75% discount when the first year you're out. And so when these employers are like, don't worry, we're gonna cover your insurance. Well, yeah, because the first year it costs like nothing. It's very, 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 very cheap when you first come out. And the reason for it, if you guys wanna think through the logic of it, is what are the odds they're gonna pay anything out the first year? I mean, I don't care how bad you screw up your first year, they're not gonna pay anything the first year. They've got a deposition, file suits, interrogatories, discovery. The first year is like a freebie year for the insurance carriers. They know they won't pay anything. So it's super cheap, very first year out. So keep that in mind. If you're negotiating a contract, keep it in mind. Like, okay, yeah, you know, I know insurance is supposed to be $100,000 in New York, but I know that my first year out, it's super cheap. So it's something to know about the insurance world. First 3 years, your pricing is less than what, for example, Dr. Rayer pays. First 3 years, okay? On the hooray, it's free. Remember, if they're giving it to you for free, ask. What are you gonna ask? What's the one thing I want you guys to all ask? Consent. Consent. Usually if they're giving it for free, you're giving up consent. And everything's negotiable, guys, in this world. Everything is negotiable. You can say, that's great, it's free, I wanna make sure I keep consent.
Even insurance premiums?
Yes. Yeah, they are. There's about 30% wiggle room on most policies and up to 50% on the lot. Yeah, between 30 and 50%. So, and it's driven all by claims, as you can well imagine. So, all right, let's go. I wanted you guys to see this. So this is a little snapshot I took of an actual certificate of insurance. When you get insurance, this is what it's so funny. You'll pay $25,000 for this little piece of paper. It's basically what you're getting. And this little piece of paper is gonna have your name on it and your specialty. It'll have your practice location. And then down here, you'll see the kind of coverages we're talking about. 1 million, 3 million. You guys seen that number thrown around yet? Maybe, no, not yet, okay.
Well, that's what's required by the hospital that you carry.
A lot of them are going to 2.4 now. Dignity's all 2.4. St. John's is 2.4 now. Yeah. So what this means, 1 million, 3 million, the company, so Garrett had his lawsuit. We know it's a bad one. Garrett's like, we're gonna have to pay. We can't get out of this thing. We've gone to trial. You have $1 million that the insurance company will pay on your behalf. Okay, they'll indemnify the patient for $1 million. And you can do up to 3 million in 1 year. If you wanna have 3 claims and all in 1 year, it's up to 3 million. So you'll hear this term all the time, 1 million, 3 million, 1 million, 3. You'll hear this they're all in the contracts, the medical staff office, everybody's gonna talk about 1 million, 3 million. It's been changing a little bit. Now I'm seeing a lot of clients are having to take out a 2 million per claim and then a 4 million annual aggregate. And the case I was telling you about with the 24-year-old motorcycle kid with the quad, that's how we ended up at 4 million. He had 2 million himself and his group had to pay another 2. And then I think ED, radio, everybody paid. It was all total, it was like 28 million. But my client themselves paid out 4 million on indemnification. The defense on that one was like $600,000. But again, young guy, catastrophic injury for life. So, and he was, by the way, completely hammered on his motorcycle. And yeah, I know. So, but in this state, there's a certain percentage of contributory negligence that you get, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't get us off the hook. It's still, care after the accident. And then this $50,000 administrative defense below it, that's your peer review stuff. Remember I told you you'll get an attorney if you have to go on a peer review thing. They'll give you $50,000 for an attorney to defend you. And that's just this policy. They're all different, but this is one of them. All right, go ahead. Tail, you're gonna hear this a lot. They give you the free insurance. You're so happy you've got free insurance. You've asked, do I get permission? Right, you've done all your things. This is the second most important one. So Garrett now is working for a group. He's been there for 5 years. He hates the group. the group sucks. You can't work there anymore. You've got to leave. Okay. So your 5-year contract's up. It's usually 3 years, but let's just say Garrett was 5 years. So Garrett's ready to leave, and they say, great, fine, see you later. You're going to go get a new job. He's not going to come work for Dr. Rayer. So Garrett saw 1,000 patients over the course of those 5 years. Okay, say 1,000 patients. We're just going to throw that out for numbers' sake. And his group says, okay, well, once you leave to go work for Dr. Rayer, what happens to one of those patients' sues? What do you guys think happens? If he leaves the group, he doesn't have insurance with them anymore because it was free. Remember, it was part of the group being free. What happens if one of those patients sues? Do you send a letter to the patient and say, oh, sorry, I'm not with the group anymore. I don't have insurance?
Yeah.
You could try. And then they'll look at your personal assets. So what happens is you have to have tail. This is an insurance contract provision. It's called DD&R, Death, Disability, and Retirement. The tail will cover it. So after you leave, Garrett's now working for Dr. Rayer. He gets this tail policy either provided by the group or you pay for it. If you pay for it, it's about twice your annual premiums. And if you're in New York, do the math. It's a lot of money. They're usually due within 90 days of cancellation. Some companies will give us 2 years to pay it out, but mainly they're due. So even if you got into one of the cheaper states and you paid $25,000 and your group was paying it for you, so that's awesome. But now you leave, you have to be able to come up with a lump sum 50 grand to go take that other job. And I get this call weekly. I didn't realize it wasn't in my contract. I got to get out. How do I get rid of this tail? And the answer is you pay for it. Or you get your new employer to try and pitch it in. You know, that's when you start negotiating on things, right? But that's a whole different talk on negotiation. But so tail, very, very important to talk about tail. And the question you ask is the same one. So what happens if I leave and there's a lawsuit? If one of these patients, while I'm working for you, sues after I leave, what happens? Okay, it's an easy question to ask. And just think that it doesn't go away. Whatever alleged negligence there is there for the rest of your career. I had a case, the longest case I had was like 12 years after an incident that the lawsuit came in.
That was like 18 months.
Pediatrics doesn't have that statute.
It's pediatric surgery too.
Yeah, and you can overturn any statute if there's a valid reason. And you know, so it's an interesting thing. The statute is from when something becomes known. So we just had actually a breast claim come in. They just left a sponge, so it's not a big deal. It's like $25,000, but it's like 4 years later. But nobody realized it until I forgot how it ended up getting discovered. It was 4 years later
Mammography or
that they
something.
find. I don't know. I'm not sure. I didn't read through the whole case because it's a minor case, so I didn't read through the details of it. But yeah, it was 4 years. 4 years later. And retained instrument, retained sponge, you get those a lot. That's why everybody's always, you know, on the sponge counts because you get, and they're worth about $30,000 for a retained sponge thing. Okay, so that's tail. So what happens to the claim? So make sure you ask, if I leave, what happens, right? If I get sued, do I take it with me? Do I have to pay for it or are you guys gonna pay for it? Okay, all right, click. Nose coverage. I know, I figured you guys would remember it if I did these kind of things. So nose coverage is kind of works hand in hand with tail. So Garrett's now working for Dr. Rayer. From the day you start working for Dr. Rayer, you're creating this nose coverage. Every patient you see is an exposure to a lawsuit. Every single case you do, every patient you see, every time you give any kind of recommendation that you need a medical license for, you're creating an exposure. The way to deal with this exposure is through nose or tail. Okay? Again, the only thing I want you to take away from nose and tail is I'm creating this exposure. What happens if I leave? What if I go get a new job? What if I open a practice? You always want to find out what happens to the exposure you're creating if you try and go into a new employment setting. Okay? And I didn't get into it because it's a whole other thing, but there are companies that sell policies with all this built in, and it's called an occurrence form policy, if you can remember that. An occurrence form policy builds everything into it. So for a lot of my new folks, when they go join a group, if the group is willing to do it, I say, go ahead and buy the occurrence form. It's all built in. You don't have to think about it, but it's more expensive. So the group has to be willing to pay for it. All right. Okay. All right. So main things I want to remember: consent. I'm going to hammer that like 5,000 times because it's such a big one for you guys. Tail, because it's expensive. If you have to buy it, you will really be upset about the contract you signed if you're going to pay for tail. Remember, it's going to cost you twice your premium. So if they say we're going to give you the insurance for free, say, well, what's it cost you? So so often I'm like, well, what's your group paying for your coverage? They're like, I don't know, it's free. No, it's not free. It's built into your salary. But so what are they? And I just ask the question, what's it cost? What are you paying for it? And then you know if the contract, ends and they don't pay for tail, what you're gonna pay. Twice whatever the policy costs. So if it's 25 grand, it's 50 grand, and
For the discounting, right?
there's no discounting in tail.
Well, like your first year, if you're,
It's
it's
mature.
the whole mature
Even the
policy
first year,
cost,
yeah,
right?
no discount. Yeah. And so it's the gross, not the net.
Yeah.
Yeah, twice the gross. And then good relationships. Probably the most important thing that I've seen over doing this for 20 years is when there's good relationships, there's good loss ratios. For whatever reason, the correlation between low claims and good relationships is the most important thing I've seen. So so those are the three things: consent, tail, good relationships. You guys can remember those three things. I think I did okay. All right.